So, a question that I'm often asked is what states do I need to avoid for final expense telesales? Or maybe you're a face to face insurance agent and you're going, I'm thinking of transitioning over to the telesales. What do I need to know? Well, I'm going to give you two states to avoid and also maybe four that you're going to find some information about that you may want to steer clear of as well. Because when you're buying leads, the last thing you want to do is make a bad decision. So, we're going to get right after it with you. And if you're taking notes, numero uno here on the states to avoid is Florida. The Sunshine State may sound great, but don't get caught here thinking that, wow, bunch of great folks, they got lots of money. I'm going to get a lot of leads and make a pile of it myself. Not saying you couldn't in the industry, but understand it's a performance based business and you don't want to be paying for leads. So you get into that state and you find out the pickup rate is horrible. The pickup rate is not great in Florida, but more importantly than that, you've got to understand Florida has a higher lead cost because so many other folks are trying to drop their fishing lines in that same pond. So if you've got a ton of fishing lures in a lake, ton of fishing lures in a pond, you're not going to be able to have maybe the same success that you could working other states. So the lead cost for Florida insanely high compared to other states, and the pickup rate is also low. Now in Florida, another thing you want to be really mindful of is, let me tell you, you can't have more than 3 telemarketing calls to any consumer in a 24-hour period. Did you know that? Put it in the comments below if you did. But you can't do telemarketing calls in Florida more than 3 telemarketing calls in a 24-hour period. So if you're dialing for dollars trying to get them to pick up the phone, you get 3 pitches, attempts. And if it goes to voicemail, that was 1 call. Yikes, right? Did you know that? That's going to be not fun if you can't call a prospect more than 3 whole times in a 24-hour period. If you're doing what's called double dialing, where you call a lead twice, well, there's 2 dials. You just used it up. So you double dialed once, that's 2 calls. You can only call 1 more time in a 24-hour period. This is painful. Work in Florida, I would say steer clear of it unless you are a Floridian. And then when you get on that phone with a Floridian, the first thing you need to do is introduce yourself as someone that lives there. If you're selling life insurance in Florida, immediately let them know that you're one of them. You're not somebody else, an outsider. They're sometimes protective of who they even want to talk to or do business with. And if you're a Floridian, you stepped up a little higher than everybody else that they're hearing over that phone. So introduce yourself as a Floridian, not just some rando telemarketer on the phone line with them. But you got to understand that you can only call 3 times in a day, period, if you're a telemarketing agent. So get that clear in your lead spend. If you're thinking about Florida, wouldn't suggest it because of the limits that you can actually dial, but more importantly, the lead cost is just so much higher. So Florida is a state that I would say avoid at all cost if you can, unless you're a Floridian. And in that case, go ahead and purchase leads because you can do some real good work there. Great people that need you. So I'm not saying not to take care of people, but you got to put your lead money into a place that gives you a lot of at-bats or the ability to make a lot of dials, because there's nothing worse than only being able to call 3 whole times in a day and then be like, okay, I'm like a kid in timeout. Just doesn't turn the wheel when you're trying to make the wealth selling final expense insurance. It's a performance-based business. And if you don't get enough at-bats, you're probably not going to make the buck. So Florida, can't call more than 3 times. Another state that you probably want to avoid is Hawaii. A lot of times people are thinking, oh, I'm going to go work Hawaii. Well, the cost for a non-resident insurance license is pretty high, and you're going to find that you're dealing with great people, but it's just not maybe the best when you're working Florida. It's also weird hours compared to the states. You got to understand that when you're thinking about calling leads. Now, another lead, hole is New York. New York has been a great state, but understand commissions sometimes are smaller in New York. The product offering is not great, and you don't have a lot of voice signature carriers out there. So if you're trying to do final expense telesales in New York, you're going to see that it's a hurdle when you're trying to help great people. I personally wouldn't advise you to work New York unless you are someone that lives there and just has to work your state. All right. But it's going to be a lot of DocuSign, a lot of, oh man, I'm just tired. I can't figure this out, Jason. DocuSign carriers, companies are going to put up walls to you completing the application, which is not going to help you realize success. So anything that keeps the client from doing business with you, I would say be cautious of selling insurance in New York if you don't have to. In final expense telesales, go sell a state that you can actually do a voice carrier from start to finish. You're going to find it's more seamless and you'll have better chances of success when you can complete the application with the phone the entire way through versus maybe New York where you've got to use a lot of these DocuSign carriers, email back and forth carriers, and it can be a train wreck for those of you in telesales. Now, face-to-face insurance agents in New York, different story, no big deal. But telesales, I wouldn't buy leads in New York intentionally, just like I wouldn't buy leads in Florida intentionally. But Florida, understand, only 3 telemarketing calls in a day to any consumer in a 24-hour period. Very important for you. Now, I hope you're liking the video, by the way, but let's dive into some other states that you want to kind of maybe steer clear of. Maine is one. You can't have more than one solicitation call using an automated telephone calling device to any phone number during each 8-hour period. Did you know that about Maine? Maybe you did. But in Maine, you can't have more than one solicitation call using an automated telephone calling device in an 8-hour period. Yikes. Not great. All right. Now, Maryland is another one that you may not have realized. Maryland, you can't have more than 3 telemarketing calls, kind of like Florida, in a 24-hour period. So if you're trying to pitch and pitch and pitch, well, you're not going to have many people to pitch to if all you can do is 3 calls in a day. All right. It just is what it is. Oklahoma is another one. Great state, good people. You can't make more than 3 telemarketing calls in a 24-hour period, just like Maryland, just like Florida. Not quite as bad as Maine, but these are some states that I would say maybe steer clear of unless you live there and that's your only resident state. Great people there, but definitely some problems that you'll see when you can only dial so many times in the course of a day, or maybe in Florida where the lead cost is so much higher and the pickup rate is so much smaller. Or if you're thinking about calling Hawaii, if you live on the mainland, there's going to be some tough things that you're going to have to handle with time zones. So you got to be really cautious that you're calling during the hours that you can compliantly complete those calls. And we do, by the way, recruit powerful insurance agents, new agents, as well as agencies to align here to sell life insurance, Medicare insurance, and annuities in our work family here at jasonfinalexpense.com. And we'll give you resources no matter where you call your current IMO or FMO a home. We'd love to help you. Even if you need lead resources, reach out at Jason Final Expense. We do appreciate you. But I wanted to put this video out there for you so you know some states to maybe avoid, you know, maybe some things that hopefully we gave to you in this video that you didn't know before. So enjoy the other content, and I'll put some videos up above here that talks about how billing works so that you can keep some of that business on the books. I think you'll enjoy that as well, so that the business that you write has the best chance of sticking and staying, and hoping that you will realize success as a result. So anything that we can do for you, reach out. I appreciate you watching, and I hope this helps. And remember, my friends, you've got what it takes. We'll see you soon.